I'm gonna record just in case I forget anything. I hope you guys are okay with that. Misa and Miranda. Nice. Where's Miranda? I don't see any Miranda. Oh, hi, Miranda. Cool. Okay, so Danny said he might join today. That would be nice, but so Danny is going to join us in the fall and become the student in the, I guess in the, yeah, in the diagnostic part. So it'd be nice if he could join. Um, and everyone could meet him, but hold on. Um, and then Paul, I was hoping that maybe people from Respect would join us. I sent the link to them to folks on Sapphires. I just finished a giant, it's not finished yet, but I finished a giant mid-year or mid project review on the other project. Which was actually good. It was a good stock taking. It was a lot of work though. Those of you who are closer to me saw me get sucked sucked into it. I'm sorry, guys. Um, anyway, so I invited them to join this group, but I think they may all be burnt out because I thought it would be good to talk about potential connections with HPC. But anyway, I was gonna let Paul talk about that HPC thing and then go on to products.
So, Tammy, you and I had talked about how there might be certain things at HPC that would be good avenues for respect that might not be as pertinent for sapphires. What I'm thinking is maybe since you are recording it, I'll talk about all of them anyway, and then that will be in the recording that people can watch. Plus, maybe we'll identify some of those other opportunities as being relevant to sapphires that's
Yeah,
not just necessarily obvious to me. So you agree with that?
agree.
Okay. Okay, so HPC, the Home Performance Conference, Will and Misa and Whitney were there with me this time, and I was in Minneapolis, so they have seen a fair bit of how that works. And next year it is in New Orleans. Anybody who would go, even though it's New Orleans, would still be expected to attend the conference. So there's that. So HPC, I think, when we're talking about having our work be practical for low-income families, for practitioners to install, that it is something that is not just about science, but trying to transform the lives of people who need it and getting it into the delivery systems like contractors who would have the potential, and as well as programs like the weatherization program, utility programs, et cetera. HPC is a great, great place to get in front of those people. There'd be a couple thousand people who are focused on implementation in homes. So that's why I think it is such a valuable place for us to get this type of work in front of. Um,
Paul,
there,
can I
yeah.
interrupt just a little bit? Because I realized when speaking to the Respect team that I didn't understand who the audience was. And so you've said practitioners, I envision weatherization installers. Can you expand on that a little bit for me and us?
But the strong majority of probably about half typically of the people who are there are actually engaged with the weatherization, DOE's weatherization assistance program. The other half are not, obviously. And but so within the weatherization program, There are, of course, people who are more at the administrative level. There will be people from DOE who run the program. There will be people from the states who oversee their programs. But then there's just a huge amount of people who are doing first assessments of homes, and then separately those who are doing the installations. So typically how the process works, a home gets approved to get weatherization services. It's primarily income eligibility, but there are some other things. An assessor goes out who is trained to look for what the most valuable opportunities are. And then they will take that information, put it into some kind of software package that would then inform or produce a work order. The work order then gets turned over to the people who do the installations. The assessors and the installers are not the same people. Some places hire assessors out of people who have been doing installations, but we can't assume that those have ever been the same person. Many agencies that deliver these services, they hire their own installers. They'll have their own crews, rolling trucks. Many of them contract out to local contractor firms. But so at HPC, you have the assessors, you have the installers, you have the people who oversee the programs. Then you have people analogous to that from the utility space, the utility program implementers, the utility people themselves. You will have their contractors and their assessors. There will often be people who are running other kinds of programs. Like, for example, a couple of years ago when it was in Seattle, there were folks from the city of Fort Collins talking about some of the great stuff they've been doing for a presentation there on the kind of the indoor air quality healthy home side. Then there are some people who are more in the new construction space. There's some people who are in the financing world. So, how do you pay for all of these things, and how do we try to maybe have mortgages that have better terms if you have energy efficiency integrated into the home? So there will be tracks about that. There will be people like me who are trainers. There will be people from about 4 national labs: NREL, Oak Ridge National Lab, TNNL up in Eastern Washington, and then Lawrence Berkeley will be there giving presentations. Those are sometimes programmatic. They'll work in some way with the weatherization program. So sometimes they're programmatic and sometimes they are about the science. But
So can I ask, is it pretty much 100% people who engage in weatherization, or are there also like equipment contractors, or is it primarily limited to like building shell and energy efficiency people?
so there will also be manufacturers there. There's a trade show. So like there would be people like those who might want to manufacture and distribute the technologies that we are working on in Sapphires. They will be at the trade show. I would say probably it's 85 to 90% is people who, whether it's for weatherization or some other program, are doing assessments or installations. And then you've got representatives from all the other stakeholders around it, the program administrators, the product manufacturers, the people who have just been doing interesting things in programs, trainers. It is all, though, directed at getting efficiency and indoor air quality and all of these different things into people's homes.
Okay, thanks.
One other thing to be clear about is, if you go to a scientific conference, if you presented it at the last one, you're not presenting it at this one. It's already been done. Everything's got to be new. There are some sessions I've been doing for a decade. Every year for the last decade, I do this session. So because like half the people every year have never been to this conference before. So we can keep doing the same things to get this education into people's hands every single year. And so, yeah, there are sessions that I feel like I've been doing this for a decade. There can't possibly be an audience. And I show up and the room is packed with 120 people. And it's, okay, it's still relevant. So that's something else to keep in mind. This is a training conference, an education conference. It's not a scientific conference where everybody is exchanging their latest research, or what was their latest research 2 years ago when you had to submit the abstract. So it really is education and training. With all of that, there's no abstract. Well, there's a little bit of an abstract, but this idea that you do an abstract with references and all of that the way we normally do, it is just not a thing. So in August, there will be a call for abstracts. But what it is you have to have your learning objectives. You know, this is what people in the conference will take away from attending our session. And the abstract is a description of the session. You know, this is an issue. This section will talk about that issue. And then there'll be a bio. And that's pretty much what there is. And you have to say, like, is this for an advanced audience? You know, who's the audience you're targeting? Is it program administrators? Is it field staff? You know, so there's things like that. And is it an advanced topic or an introductory topic? So there's those sorts of things. There are 3 lengths of sessions. The shortest one is 60 minutes. They will sometimes have multiple speakers. Typically, they try to avoid having more than 3 speakers in a 60-minute session because you're starting to get it too distracted. But even with that, it's supposed to have a cohesive, coherent theme. It's not like a scientific conference where they say in panel 12, we've got these 5 talks that have nothing to do with each other than at a very, very high level, like we measured something. That really is supposed to be a unified theme that everybody is speaking to. Then there are 90-minute and 3-hour sessions. The 90-minute and 3-hour sessions are always on the first day, Monday. And then once you hit Tuesday, everything is an hour long. So it's an opportunity to really get into stuff and do it at a level that provides it. We really want it to have practical knowledge, you know, something that they can take back to the office and do things differently, do things better as a result of having attended your session. If you get the abstract accepted, there's no further writing of a document. There's no extended abstract. There's no poster. There's none of that sort of thing. The deliverable is the presentation. But of course, the presentation is longer than if you're at a scientific conference where you have 12 minutes plus 3 for questions. So that is kind of the opportunities at HPC at the kind of the most basic level. Now, I do want to talk about a couple other things and this is where I think it might be more valuable for respect, but maybe it's valuable here as well.
Can you stop for a minute so we
Yeah.
can talk about what the session looks like?
Yeah.
So this is new for me. I don't know if it's new for anybody else, but this idea of a conference where you actually have learning objectives is kind of cool. But how do you know if you've met the objectives? Like as an educator, how do you assess that?
We don't actually, in the conference, we don't actually do an assessment, like a quiz at the end. So we don't actually know if we've met the objectives. It's basically, you know, at the end of the session, you should have delivered all of the information that is needed for somebody who was paying attention to be able to meet those learning objectives. One thing one thing I'm very adamant about is when I'm developing my learning objectives is they should be accessible. Maybe we're not doing an assessment, but for example, I never have a learning objective that starts with, you know, by attending the session, the attendees will, then what's your verb? I never have the word understand be my verb. You have no way to assess whether somebody understands. What you can do is they can list, for example, at the end of the session, attendees can list the 8 keep it principles of a healthy home. At the end of this session, they can discuss means of addressing moisture issues in homes. So it's that kind of thing where, and then you need to have in your presentation, every one of those learning objectives is met to where you could, if there was an assessment piece, you would be able to do that.
Mhm.
So
Okay, so typically, again, in a scientific conference, you're assigned to give a presentation, you show up in this session, and then people show up and you probably never see each other again. Do the presenters in a session tend to work together since they have a single set of learning objectives?
if there are multiple presenters, yes, they do. They will typically, have some pre-conference meetings where they lay out, because there should be, because there are, when you look at the conference program, there will be learning objectives for the entire session.
Mhm.
And if there
Okay.
are 3
Yeah.
different people from different organizations, they have to still all feed back into those learning objectives. Now, it could be, let's say you got 3 people from 3 different organizations. It could be that each one of them is related to one of those learning objectives, but they still do need to know collectively what they're doing in that session. And a lot of work gets put in by the staff and the review committees that I've been on for the last several years to really try to make sure that the people that get combined into a session are good fits for each other.
Okay, so just to be clear, it sounds like there's maybe more work up front for for those of us who are used to submitting to um scientific conferences where you just write something, you hope you ask your co-authors, and then you show up and hope you have a presentation. This would takes a little more coordination, but it is expected to be a learning opportunity. Okay, thanks.
Yes. Yeah. And then, if you do an hour session, what I would typically assume is that you're planning for about 35 to 40 minutes of material, and then the rest 20 to 25 minutes of discussion, question and answer. And
And you
the
get
way
that much discussion?
oh yeah, sometimes you run out of time and you're like, crap, I didn't get to my last 12 slides.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's absolutely happened. This is an audience that, I mean, we're not talking a bunch of grad students who are afraid to raise their hand. There are
Grad
people who are,
students are nice.
I didn't say they weren't nice, but a lot of them are afraid to raise their hand. You will be challenged. I've been in this industry a long time. I've got a certain status in this industry, and I'll have people telling me they think I'm flat out wrong. And and it's good. We have some really,
Mhm.
really good dialogue.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
And I've absolutely had sessions where I planned for an hour, including questions, and I've still got a dozen slides left, and it's time to go.
Mhm.
So yeah, it can be a very, very conversational audience. And so typically I will say, let's, have questions as we go. And part of my rationale for that is if I don't get to those last 12 slides and it's because we've been having robust conversation, well, isn't that giving people what they're wanting? They're wanting to have that conversation. They are learning. And I may be learning from them as well. So but I still do want to get through everything. So I actually had one that I did this year that I've done for a bunch of years that we moved into a 90-minute session instead of a 60, because at 60 minutes, I never get to the end. And
Hmm.
we took all 90.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's kind of how I would plan it. Now, um, the standard model that I've been talking about is really where we are educating them. Much less common, but not impossible, is where we're trying to set up a forum for them to educate us. And if it's them educating us, that could conceivably be done in a 60-minute session. It would probably be more likely to be accepted if it was on that Monday, a 90-minute or 3-hour session. But there are other opportunities as well. And I certainly don't think a 3-hour session would be the best way to do it. But I can see it could be done. I think a 90-minute session on Monday that's separated out is better. One of the issues is they'll have like 12 concurrent tracks, and people are there to learn. And so if they're having to choose between 12 concurrent tracks and 11 of them, they could learn something, and the other one you're learning from them, they're likely to go to one of the ones where they're learning something. Mondays tend to be the special topics. And so you'd more likely find people, there's not as many concurrent ones, and you'd more likely find people willing to come and share their perspectives, especially if it was pitched properly. Other ways to try to get that kind of input from people would be to do something at the trade show. Get a booth. Set up with the organizers to have some special thing off on the side where you're getting people's information. They have done that sort of thing before as well, where they see that the information that you're trying to gain is stuff that's really they are the right audience, and the organizers will conceivably set up kind of like we've got a little table over here where we'd love to get your feedback. Something I did a number of years ago, and Ryan Scott, who's on the Respect team, actually participated in this, was I worked with the organizers to set up a room after the conference. So the conference ends at about noon on Thursday. And we got about 25 contractors into the room. We provided lunch. So we catered the lunch for them. So we had all, huge sandwich trays in the back. And they came in and we spent, I forget, it was like 2 or 3 hours of, I facilitated a discussion with 25 contractors. And I did that by coordinating with the conference organizers. One thing about that, I am on the board of the organizing organization. Sounds weird to say organizing organization, but and so I have those ins, but I've seen them do it. I've seen them do it very effectively to help folks with that. So I think that certainly for Respect and what they're doing, but perhaps for us as well, if we're trying to learn something from them, we do have these opportunities. But I will say, well, if we wanted to do something that wasn't a normal session, we don't have to have that on their radar in August. That's something that we could even probably bring to them in as late as, say, February, but it would be better if it was in the fall, November, December timeframe.
So let's see, a couple of things. I'm not sure that I want to talk too much about the contractors educating us in this group, since it's not that beneficial to them, unless there is something we want to hear from them. And so we can probably stop that there, but I have thought about well, a couple of things about HPC. One is I thought about having sessions with the bits that we're doing on Sapphires, because I feel like one of the things we're supposed to do is bring some of the air management principles forward through Lori's work, and it might be good to try to test how that plays with contractors before we embed it into a learning module, right? And so but I think there's a lot of pieces, and I don't know how relevant these are to contractors. How much do they want to know? How much do they want to know about the healthy air aspect of what they do, right? Which is mostly what we're working on. Christian's working on the anticipation question, and these might be far out for them, but it's things that we want people to think about. Erica's working on or will be working on how people respond to signals along with the automation that Christian can do. How do we, like, do you think this is a good audience to put this in front of? And Misa and Dom and Will, you were also there, and Whitney was there, so maybe seeing the people that you've seen and kind of seeing what we do, I feel like what we do is relevant to people who care about homes, and yet it's not their usual thing. So I'm curious about how that is going to play, or I think it's up to us to make it play well. How do we do that?
So, yeah, I was gonna say, I certainly have my answer, but I'm definitely curious from Will, Whitney, and Misa, who attended, what their thoughts are. And since Will raised his hand, I think let's let Will talk to that first, and I'll circle back after everybody else has had a chance, and I'll answer.
Yeah, sure, Tammy. I think this might answer your question. And so the sessions that I went to that were, I want to say, more of like public health based, or about like the health aspect of the things that we're doing in the homes, there were quite a few contractors and people who are doing these installation, doing the work in the homes, who were at these sessions and also interacted a lot. As I think there is a lot of these people doing work in homes who are curious and at
Mm.
least like care about what are they doing, like what's the effect of what's happening, like what improvements that they're making. Because I figure like all these people are just doing this because they're getting paid to do this work, but there are definitely a lot of people who care about the work that they're doing, and I think they were very interested to learn more about this, especially who don't have a background in, I would say, the health side, like the public health side, the improvements that we're making on people's lives, or that they are.
Misa and Whitney, do either of you have something you want to share?
I think for me, there was a session that I had attended that I thought was completely different from what I expected it to be. I think it was just because of the description that they had put for that specific session, and it was titled like how to convince a homeowner of an investment versus like an expense. And I was like, okay, well, that'd kind of be helpful for like sapphires, like kind of help them with their homes. But it was basically like a big like contracting thing, like some companies trying to like sell their products. And I was like, okay, kind of got me there. So I don't know if this is the correct answer, but I mean you can kind of finesse things in a way to word them in a way that like kind of leads people to think it's different from what they think it actually is. Um, and either way, I mean, they're stuck there for the hour session. So
Misa and I were in that session together, if it's the one I'm thinking of, and I think we actually left partway through it because
So you're not
we're
stuck
like,
there.
we didn't come here for a sales pitch, and it definitely was absolutely a sales pitch, but it was in direct contrast to the rest of the sessions that I attended, at least. And definitely I think the ones that like me and Will and Misa were able to go to together, like the general tone was a homeowner first perspective and point of view, aside from that one session. And I feel like that's in total contrast to every other type of conference I've ever been to in like the private and corporate sector. And I think that that's an important point of view to maintain with any language, any communication, is like, without the homeowner, none of this actually works, makes sense, or exists.
And so now that they've all had a chance, I will say that I think we often think of contractors, these kind of middle actor folks, as just a conduit, and they're doing what they're paid to do. Somebody says, I need a furnace. They come in and they put in a furnace, and boom, there it is. But you spend time with them, and what you realize is you've got to really, there's a tremendous amount of intelligence and thought and interest in learning in these folks. They may not have gone on and gotten advanced degrees. That's just not the path they took, but there's still tremendous talent and intellectual inquiry in these folks. But their inquiry is not just for their own self-education. Their inquiry is for how do I use this to make homes better? What can I take home with me from this conference and start putting into my practices? One thing that I found to be really, really important with this audience also is they, we're talking about adult learners here. And if you're telling them they should do something, they're going to want to know why. So you can't just say, hey, this is important, you should do it. They're going to be like, well, why? And why is it like that? And if you're saying this is how to do it, why is that the way to do it instead of something else? And so, yeah, to what Tammy was saying, like, what's the right level? They do want to know why, but they don't need to know how to build the watch. So we think about like what Christian's work is and Christian Carson's with the anticipation. They want to know that there is anticipation. They will really find that interesting, that there's this anticipation, seeing some graphs that say, see, there's this leading edge. And so if we see this here in the outdoor air, and then there's a lag before that, then we can use that anticipation too. They don't need to know the algorithm.
And are they going to be interested in findings that are pre-product? Like if they have a question, like, what do I do with this? Then we say, well, sorry, we're still we're still testing it. Is that okay?
If it really is, hey, we're doing cool stuff, come back in 3 years and we'll tell you how it turned out. They're not going to like that. But if you tie back to other things, like for example, the pressurization thing, we can say, okay, we're still working on the product, but the principles are there. And even outside of the product, here is how these principles could apply to some of what you're already doing and how it fits in. Like, for example, some of the same principles we're talking about in Sapphires are things that they really could have used, really would have been beneficial for them to know in 2020, when millions of people across the country were calling their HVAC contractors wondering how to keep themselves safe from the pandemic. Okay, we didn't have this product, and this product is not focused on the pandemic, but there's some principles. And so I think, yeah, if we get through the entire session and everything is tune in next week to find out how it turns out, they will be disappointed. Having something that is, and in the future, we might also have some other cool stuff. Here's some stuff you can use today, and here's some of what's coming. That can work.
So we could, for example, talk about pressurization, and then Christian might show his anticipation work, and then we could say, and this is how this would play into it.
Right. And we could kind of tie it back to products that they're already aware of. I mean, we are essentially using some of the using some concepts that are already in products that some people are using. So we can tie it back to that and say, okay, so it's not being done for this purpose and at this scale and in this way and with this anticipation, but let's connect it to some of the things you might already be familiar with.
The timing is great. This person was just sharing a plot of his latest anticipation things. Literally, as you were sharing, timing was fortuitous. So I want to circle back for Cam a minute for like that product sales like concern piece. I don't know, maybe it's a longer discussion to talk about right now. I'm a little or I think we're going to be really careful about this like topic that we're doing from that sales pitch thing, especially as we start to get into like some of the techno-economic pieces. And again, I don't think we need to talk about all of that, but just kind of a flag for us to think about if we need to start getting proper language around this that doesn't come across as a sales pitch, product, whatever.
You know, we have the advantage of not being from a manufacturer. So that helps us. If we, you know, I've definitely seen where like somebody from a fan manufacturer, a ventilation fan company, be a Panasonic, Newtone, Brown, something like that will come up and they'll give a talk. And it might be that everything they say is absolutely true. And they might even do a decent job of not having their own like branding on it for, hey, you should use our products. And still, it's a manufacturer, so it comes across as a sales pitch. The exact same thing done by somebody on this call would come across very differently just because of who we're with. So we have that advantage, but it is absolutely a concern, something we can't ignore. I will say that if we decide as a group that we want to put in one or more proposals, and Will, I did see your message in the chat about that. If we do decide we want to put in one or more proposals, I am very happy to work with anybody on how it gets crafted in terms of the session proposal, so that it comes across as something that would be of interest to people who attend. And then very happy to work with people on developing the presentation to make sure that it is consistent with what these folks are expecting. I've been going to this conference for 23 years, 24 years. I've got a lot of experience with what they're looking for. I made my mistakes, but I'm happy to leverage my experience with that to help every one of you put together something and then deliver it in a way that will suit this audience. And I realized I forgot something, Tammy, when you were asking about the audience. In the last 2 years, HUD has required every one of their Healthy Homes grantees to attend the conference. So that's like another 400 to 800 people from the HUD Healthy Homes side that historically has not really been there, but they have started coming, and it's still kind of early and trying to get them integrated. They're really looking for HUD Healthy Home stuff, and you got all this weatherization stuff, but there is getting to be some cross-pollination there. And that's an audience that might find this really interesting as well.
Yeah, so, yeah, I think, I feel like that I've heard that more and more healthy homes intersections are occurring, and in a very practical way. So I feel like our team should somehow put together a session. And I don't know what that looks like. And I don't know how many of the principals need to be brought in. I feel like every stream of this work has something to offer, but I would suggest that we try one session next year, and then, because nobody has experience with it but you, Paul, and so we try one, pick a couple of things that seem to fit together, whether it's the anticipation or the behavior stuff or whatever, and then something about pressurization and how it could be used, and then just try it. That would be a venue for some of the researchers to attend, both senior and junior people, and get a flavor of it. So that would be my suggestion on HPC. And then we can talk separately about respect. I'm thinking something similar.
And I do want to put out the idea, this thing of getting input from contractors. We are with the tablets in the field, the surveys that are being done, we are getting the input from the users, and we are working on the design. We are not actually talking to the people who are in the middle, who would be trying to take this and get it installed. Now, we're not product manufacturers. We're not trying to figure out everything, but I don't think it would be the worst idea to try to set up some kind of mechanism to get their feedback on what they would need to see in this to make it.
So that's not an issue. I think that is totally important to the other team. I just did not want to take more of this team's time talking about something that's not relevant to them.
Well, but it is relevant to us, right?
Well, it is. You're right. You're right. So you're talking about I misunderstood you then. Maybe you are talking about like having contractors input on what the installation of some of the technology would be.
Right.
Yeah, okay, then you go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, we're
I didn't think about
asking users we're asking potential end users what, their opinions that would influence whether they would use it. I think, we would not be misplaced to ask the people who would install it what they would need to feel like it was something that they would feel comfortable selling. Yeah, if they don't know why this is being done, they're not going to pitch it to people. They're not going to be able to get people to use it, and they have to feel like it's something that they could manage to install and to educate homeowners about, and believe was a benefit. And so what are the sorts of things that they, as those middle actors, would need to see with what we are doing in Sapphires to have it be something that isn't just a user thinks, hey, this would be cool if it existed, and we're trying to make it exist. And they're like, knock yourselves out.
That's definitely out there as a possibility. Okay. Well, I'm sorry that I didn't think of that. That it's a really good idea. And so am I correct that that's really a tech team kind of thing?
It could be focused on the tech team, but if we were starting to ask, if we were trying to get the input of these contractors, we'd really want to work with the communications team to make sure that we were asking the questions in the best way as well. And what kind of information might they want? And the whole survey is being sent out to the users is more on the communications team. Why wouldn't it also be what the communications team would want to learn from contractors?
That's totally fair. How would you guys do that? Or how do you envision if you had that resource? How would you want to do it? Would you want to bring the thing and then, or just show photos of it and your feet, or what do you think would be needed?
I think that having some photos and schematics, it depends on the venue. If we were trying to do this as a session, one of their normal sessions, then absolutely we would have a few slides and then have a facilitated discussion. If we tried to set up something that was outside of that, it could be the same way if it was like what I did with Ryan a few years ago. If we wanted to have something at the trade show, I think having some kind of display that shows what we're talking about and ideally gives people something for their time and participation, something small. So those are kind of the approaches I would take depending on the venue within the conference. But I think limited on the graphics, enough to give them an idea of what we're talking about. And then we really want to hear from them.
So no prototype or anything.
No.
Yeah, if we go down that road, I think it's gonna be important for us to do probably a couple rounds of iteration on what that level of detail we're presenting is. I am mentally doing somersaults right now in terms of balancing kind of the point you brought up before, Paul, of not explaining or providing them the right information in terms of not telling them all of how the things work, while making sure that we convey enough of, well, these are the things that you can't adjust. We need to do A, B, and C. We can adjust E, D, and F. So there's gonna be some balancing act there, I think, if we have those conversations. Just a thought for us to ponder, I guess.
Yeah, if we did do some kind of facilitated session with contractors, the way I would want to see us do it is that we spend quite a bit of time up front figuring out what are we asking? What's the language behind the asking? What materials are we putting out there? How are we recruiting people? There's different ways to do that. I'm not worried about us being able to get people, but how do we recruit people to get them in? Is it is it in a regular session slot, or is it something outside of the normal stuff? And then if we did some kind of facilitated session, which means not the thing at the trade show. If we did a facilitated type of session, what I would propose is that I be the one that facilitates it, because I am known by this audience. And I could do that, but I would want others of you there, not just have it be me. I'd want others of you there to participate, and I can facilitate because of my connection with this industry and this audience. But yeah, I'd want it to have at least 3 of us there.
Yeah, I think it'd be good if you didn't come off as like, here's Paul's thing. Which is, it's easy to do. It's easy to become the representative if you're the only one there.
Right, and my role in that would be primarily facilitation.
Yeah.
With leveraging my knowledge of this audience to try to do effective facilitation, including things like follow-up questions, just to make sure we're all understanding things like that. But yeah, I would not do it if it was just me. Yes, it is during the semester, so yeah, there's for those who teach in the spring, I know there's a challenge with going to a conference in the middle of the semester.
Yeah.
But that's what it is.
I'm guessing you don't have many faculty members among your contractors, but there might be some under the HUD grantees.
That's true.
Okay, well, are people on board with considering a session and moving toward crafting one? What do they do, Paul? Do you know?
They haven't released, as far as I can recall, the actual request for proposals, but they are typically due around mid-August.
September 13th, it says. No, it
It's
says to present, submit a proposal to present. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, so if it's September 13th,
That is when it's due, yeah.
okay. And one other thing that I'll share just a little bit about the process that we follow. And I say we because I've been on the review committees for a while. We get all these submissions. We'll review them. We'll decide these are ones that we think would be really good. We want to have in the conference. These are ones that we don't. Often, oops, I just sent that to Will. I was intending to send to everyone the dates. So we always have some sessions where we're like, well, we think we'd like something like this, but we think we need to add somebody. Or we will also talk about what's missing. And we will, after the session submissions have closed, we will bring in sessions that had not been submitted. So there is the opportunity to get sessions in after that September 13th deadline, but it's a lot better if we get it in by then.
Yeah, I agree. Is there
Sure.
anyone who feels like they don't want this to go forward, like we're not ready or it's not the right direction for you?
So the only piece I would say is I guarantee CSU tech transfer office would consider this something that they'd be interested in. And as soon as we make it public, things get more complicated. So if we want to do this, I think it'd be good at least to have a courtesy conversation with them, which means that we should probably start now because they're like super backlogged and absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great great point.
I've done it wrong like 4 times this year, so use them all on my do it bad ways for the year.
Okay.
But no, I think it's great to actually take this there. And I actually think CSU Tech Office, despite what I just said, would be thrilled to have this floated to those sort of people. And I say that completely acknowledging that's like 100% 180 from this can't come across like a sales pitch statement. I think it'd be great to get those feedback early and from kind of a very candid audience. So I bet we're missing some pretty fundamental roadblocks in terms of disseminating something like this, and hitting those early would be, like identifying this early would be great.
Cool. Okay. So,
Are folks from the communications team interested in participating?
Yeah, I think so. If there's, value that we can add for sure.
I feel like we've got quite a lot like to present in an hour.
And we could look at the 90-minute session on Monday if we're not looking to do a 3-hour session on Monday.
I mean, we could maybe consider something like nodding to the notion of systemic intervention and like you need to communicate, you need to anticipate, you need to understand the house pressures kind of thing. I don't know. It's a hand wavy thing, but that could also engender some discussion from other people who have worked on just one of those pieces. Okay, thanks, Paul. I thought we would have time to talk about other venues for presentation today, but every time I put 2 topics on the agenda, I get told, I observe that only one fits. I do feel like that our team is really active and making a lot of progress, and yet we are short on outward facing product. And I'd like us to think about that. Not that I want to put anyone in a position of doing something that they don't feel is appropriate or ready, but but sometimes it's a marker of like, okay, heads up, what should we do anything differently? So, so I want to come back to that question. Dom is going to be presenting at Indoor Air shortly. But I think there's other things to talk about.
I do recommend that if we're going to put something forward for HPC and try to have it be one thing, and we want to include communications and technical teams, that we either set aside one of these in the not too distant future to plan out what that is, or decide that some subset of people who is going to be contributing to that get together separately in a separate time slot to plan it out. It's great to say we're going to do it. I think we've got to set a time to actually do it. So
Make sure your availability is on the calendar, and I will look for a time like that.
for the regular time slot, you mean?
Yeah, for the regular time slot. And if I don't see anything, then I'll try to find another time.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Have a great weekend, people.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too, everybody.